with people in person and online. It's obviously like a hybrid event, and you're welcome to join us. Like I said, either in person or online. There's a fantastic lineup of speakers and content planned with several interesting keynotes, presentations around different topics around AI, ChatGPT. We have various best practices that we're talking about. It's a great opportunity to meet in person and have conversations with peers in the community, and very, very excited to meet you, whether it's in person or online next month. With that said, today's webinar is with Saeed Khan. He's joining us from Toronto today. Very, very excited about hearing from him today about let's say, some dysfunctional elements in product management. And I was actually very, very excited to prepare this topic with him. And when we talked about the various topics, one thing that I was particularly looking forward to is to see how Saeed's educational background has impacted his way of looking at these things. Like, he has a degree in physics, and I think anyone in tech has a certain knack or some admiration for anyone in physics. At least when I started computer science, a lot of our colleagues kept joking that the best computer scientists were physicists, right? So that said, I would like to turn it over to Saeed, where we'll quickly and briefly talk a little bit about his professional background and how that has led to some of these observations and epiphanies that he's had around product management in general, and then some of the dysfunctions that we've probably all witnessed ourselves in particular. Let me stop sharing my screen, and let me have Saeed share his screen. Excellent.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Saeed. So why don't you quickly tell us a little bit about your background? I think when we talked about your professional, when we looked at your professional career, it's first and foremost, I think the breadth of experience that you've had that was very impressive, but also then the level of detail that you were able to dive into in product management over these years. So why don't you kind of give us a little bit of a background on what that journey looked like, and maybe what your main takeaways were. And then, like I said, from my personal interest is how do you think your educational background maybe has shaped your point of view and your learnings?
Sure. Yeah. So, okay. So this is interesting. Yeah. So I did undergrad in physics. I took electives in math and computer science. So a fairly technical area of study. And then I worked as a software developer for a few years. And, it was interesting because when I thought about it, I was, what did I actually learn in university? What was I applying? And it really was problem solving. And I think that's really, if you spend 4 years solving physics problems and math problems and software problems, you learn how to solve problems in general. And I think that's probably the one thing that has carried forward. And I think I apply that every day in product management, because certainly there's a lot of problems to solve in product management. So,
and then do you kind of think in systems, or do you have some, I don't know, axioms or things of that nature that you've kind of developed over these years, or is this doesn't really match one-to-one?
No, there are. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things. I actually wrote probably one of the first blog posts I ever wrote, maybe 15 years ago, was called Product Management Axioms. And it was a set
there
of
we go.
4 or 5, axioms that, just, I thought about them, and these were things that, I just saw, these are things that are common across the board. So yeah, absolutely. And I think that educational background kind of led to that kind of thinking, very systematic, really understand first principles, look at things from a fundamental way.
Got it.
And I carry that forward to this day.
Excellent. Excellent.
So I've been in product management for 25 years. It was, I think, 1997, so maybe even 26 years. I've worked both in Canada and US in startups and public companies. Most of my focus has been on enterprise software and B2B. And then I work currently as a coach and a consultant working with technology companies, helping them solve their product problems, so really focusing on problems and solving them. And these are both organizational problems as well as product issues and things like that. So I like to say I help them build better products and better product orgs.
Excellent. And I think we've talked about that a little bit, like over the years, things have obviously evolved and matured. And I think you mentioned how at some point product management didn't really have its own home, and like that at some point it kind of reported into marketing, sometimes into engineering. But when you kind of look at these 25 years, like if you had to maybe describe at a high level the progress and like how product management has evolved, like how would you maybe like describe that from the very beginning until now? Do you see there's like a light at the end of the tunnel? Are we like moving towards the right place, or is this like 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards kind of thing?
Yeah, it's gotten a lot more complicated. So when I first wanted to be a product manager, people would say, "What's a product manager?" And there weren't a lot of product manager jobs, and I'm ancient history, but I saw my job, the job that I first got in product management, it was in a newspaper ad, right? So that's how long ago it was. And it was shocking to see a product manager job in Toronto in the newspaper. But I applied and got it, thank goodness. But what was interesting back then was things were relatively simple. Like the company I worked in was a well-run company, and they understood product management, and the role was fairly well defined. And it was hard. It was a very comprehensive job, probably more comprehensive than what most product managers do today. I had budget authority to a certain extent. We were part of marketing. I reported to the VP of marketing, and I had say in the marketing budget, where we would do our ad spend and things like that, as well as our website, our messaging, obviously in product, finance. I did a lot of pricing work. It was a really great job, and we shipped physical product as well, right? So something fairly, few people do today. And so there was a whole logistics side of it that really needs to be understood, and that was part of the job.
Got it. Appreciate it. Got it. Why don't we kind of then dive right into it? Like, obviously, you've kind of looked at the dysfunctions. I think like the context that you provided is to like how you came up with the term was influenced by another book that you really like. Maybe maybe you could mention that to our audience.
Sure. So there's a fairly well-known book by Patrick Lencioni called 5 Dysfunctions of Teams. And he talks about them, and there are things like absence of trust and lack of commitment and things like that. And those are very horizontal dysfunctions. He talks about them being as applicable to a business organization as to a church group. And so in my work as a consultant, I work, like I said, with product teams. And, with that book in mind in the back, I started seeing dysfunctions. And there are a very different set of dysfunctions that are specific to product management organizations. Not that product management organizations don't have issues with trust, et cetera, but there's more specific ones that I think make it difficult for product organizations to succeed. And so that led to just a lot of work. And then I wrote a blog post, and here we are talking about it.
Awesome.
So
yeah, I'm curious, so what those are, and curious to hear what the first one is.
Okay. All right. So I have a few slides. I'll just skip through them. But, one of the things I just want to say is like, when we talk about product management, different people have different definitions. And this is my definition of it, cross-functional business and technology management focused on driving product success, right? And to me, that well defines it. And product management is complicated, right? There's lots of facets to it. It's cross-functional. There's business, there's engineering, and then there's the whole product life cycle where things change. And so it's no wonder that product management is hard, and that these things lead to problems, right? Product management isn't well understood still, even today. And so the 5 dysfunctions, right? They are, the first one I call poor job definitions, and we'll talk about that. Underskilled product managers, poor process, unclear objectives, and lastly, weak product leadership.
Got it. Get it. And then I think when you and I talked, they all like pretty much made sense to me. The only thing where I maybe like misunderstood you at first was poor job definitions, because like when I saw job, I immediately thought of job descriptions, right?
Yeah.
So that's obviously not what this is meant by that. But I think
No.
very yeah. So that was something that that stood out to me.
Yeah, I'll explain that. I mean, when I say job definition, right? So to me, a job definition and a job description are related, but they're different. A job description is what we're used to seeing on a job board or wherever, right? It's the wish list of everything that a company wants. But a job definition is really the internal definition of the actual job. What is it that you expect the person to do? What are they going to deliver? How will they be measured, etc. Right? Like those things exist in some form in most companies, but for product management, what I've seen is they're not well defined at all. Right? Oftentimes, a company will take someone else's job description. They'll copy it from a job board and modify it and use that. So I think the job definition really defines how well the company understands the role. If you think of a sales role, there's a very clear definition of what that sales rep will do, how will they be measured, et cetera, right? We also see it in marketing to some extent. We don't see it in product management very much. And I think that's a problem, right? It's a problem because if you start out with a weak or a non-existent definition, how are you going to get into execution? And so here's an example. This is a job description, right? And this is a real job description. I didn't make it up. And it's not even the whole job description, but I pulled it off a job board. And if you can't read the small print, I'll blow it up for you, right? So this is the responsibilities, and you can see this long list of things: strategic leadership, leads product discovery, personalization, customer data, like this laundry list. And then at the very bottom, other duties as assigned, right? Sort of like, I just like, what else could they ask, right? Like, and when I see jobs like this, it tells me they don't know what they're looking for, because there's no way this is an actual job. Like, nobody can do all of this. And if they're expecting someone to do all this, they better be paying them a lot of money. And you see job descriptions like this, but then when you get to the job itself, it looks more like this. You spend all your time in Jira, you're not talking to customers, and you're basically working in a feature factory. And that's the opposite. It's a bad situation to be in. You don't want to be there. You don't have agency. You don't really do real, I'll say this, you don't really do real product management. You're really just focused on delivery. And I think that's a problem. And it's a problem because the company doesn't understand product management.
Sure. And obviously, like there's like a challenge that I would say PMs have, or like that they have to be aware of, is when they join organizations, that they have to be aware of the fact that these companies oftentimes don't know what the job role, or like what the scope of the role should be, right? So
yeah. So I think there's two sides to this, right? There's, to all these dysfunctions, there's the leadership side and how to address it, and then there's the individual product manager side. So if we think about when product leaders are hiring, right? So if you're hiring a product manager, right, and you owe them a certain kind of diligence, right? So think through, like, what's that 1 year objective you'd have? Like, you're hiring someone brand new. Think ahead and say, a year from now, how would I measure them, right? Do that when you're defining the job, when you're thinking about hiring. How would I measure their success a year out, right? And then what skills and outputs and activities would be needed to achieve that success, right? So if it's a brand new product you want to build, that's very different than hiring them for an existing product that's kind of already mature, right? It's a different set of activities, a different set of skills. And so you want to think about that and use that to define the role, right? And once you define the role, you can create the job description, and the job description should, match that. And now you've got some congruence between what you're advertising to the world and what the people will actually do. And then lastly, don't copy other people's job descriptions. Like it's just pointless. Like I have to laugh when I see that, and you know it when you see it, because like the job description I showed you before, like nobody writes that from scratch. Like no one sat down and said, I'm going to write 35 lines of very detailed work. Like they pulled that from somewhere and, you know, blended it with something. So, you know, just spend an hour, do it well, and then hire good people. So that's for the leaders. And then for product managers, like ask, like, what do PMs actually do, right? And check it against what they claim they do, right? Like ask, do people, is there a product vision, right? Do people understand what it is, right? Does the company have a discovery process? Do they have a road mapping process, right? When do they say no to customer requests? Like what's the criteria, right? If they don't actually have a criteria for saying no, you know what kind of company they are, right? Do PMs work cross-functionally, or are they focused on working with engineering, right? Do they have clear objectives? And we'll talk about objectives later. Oops. You know, how are objectives defined? What are they? Like really get an understanding of how that company operates, and then decide whether you want to work there or not. So I think there's diligence you can do on the interview side and the interviewer side as well. So
that makes a lot of sense. I have an interesting question. Have you actually seen, I know that the job description is basically the consequence or like the symptom of a well or badly or poorly defined job definition. But have you actually seen well-written job, let's say, job descriptions anywhere on LinkedIn or on any company side, like without naming any names? Have you actually seen that?
Well, it's hard to judge, right? So the one I showed you was an extreme case, obviously. It's hard to judge because I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. But yeah, sometimes you read them and they're like, yeah, this is not asking for the world. They're very specific in what they're looking for, right? So I've seen some of those, and you know, when I work with my clients, I try and get them to do the same thing, right? Like let's think about that 1 year milestone and work backwards. And I think just using that as a kind of a mechanism is a good way, right? Because people say, well, we don't know what they'll do. They might need to do this. Yes, okay, they might need to do lots of things, but in a year, what are they realistically going to do, right? So I think you can look at a job description and tell if the company knows what they're doing, because if they're asking for the moon, they don't know what they're doing. If it's more specific and more constrained, they probably have thought about it. So, you know, I haven't done a survey to see how many fall into which, but most PM jobs I've seen don't match the reality of the work itself.
Right, and it's probably tied to what you mentioned earlier. Like it's like the lack of focus on outcomes. Like these poorly written job descriptions typically describe activities, yes, right, as opposed to like what is it that we're trying to accomplish. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes. So okay. The next one is underskilled product managers, right? And this is endemic, right? And part of the reason is we don't study product management in university, right? I studied physics and math, and you know, if I was in computer science, I would have spent 4 years learning computer science. But we don't have really undergraduate courses in product management, and there are some now, you know, academic master's level courses. There's one here in Canada in Queen's University. There's some other ones starting up in other places. Carnegie Mellon, I think, has one. So how do you learn? And the fact is, most of us, and myself included way back, we learn on the job. And so the problem with that, of course, is it's a very complex role, right? There's a broad set of skills and knowledge you need. This is just a subset. If you want to get more detailed, you know, you can break it out even further. And not that every product manager needs all of these skills and knowledge, but over the course of, you know, several years, you're probably going to encounter a lot of these, you know, qualitative analysis, quantitative analysis. There's the leadership aspects, communication, etc. So it can be quite complex, and yet without formal education, how do you actually, you know, excel at it? And then there's other confounding factors, right? So companies don't understand product management. There's very weak onboarding of product managers. I've seen, I think engineering does a really good job in general of onboarding new engineers. I think product management could learn from them, but they need to build their own mechanisms to really onboard. And think about it. You have to understand your product, you have to understand your market, you have to understand the kind of dynamics in the company, you understand competitors, there might be partnerships, there might be technology. There's a lot to learn to get up to speed as a product manager. So I think companies should think about onboarding. We talked about lack of education. Most companies don't have a good development process for product managers. So once they hire them, how do they continue to improve their skills? And then weak product leadership, which we'll get to. So there's all these confounding factors to why product managers are underskilled, right? They kind of brought in and told to do a job and not given often a lot of guidance.
Got it. And I think that's arguably the mission of ISPMA, right? Like to kind of fight that madness, like that lack of it's literally like the lack of opportunities in terms of like learning about product management. Because like I said, the only alternative is like kind of learn on the job. But I think the organization that we're part of, like this nonprofit, is literally like trying to in different ways, like these webinars, these conferences with a ton of content, curriculums. So I think we are fighting the fight and help alleviate this issue.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. Like, I think we need a multi-pronged approach, but I think, to be perfectly honest, the sort of focus needs to be companies themselves need to understand how to develop product managers, how to hire them, how to onboard them, and how to develop them. Because you're going to learn in the job, then learn in the job, right? Like learning in the job can't be just doing the job and learning. It's got to be learning and then doing, And I just that it's really a challenge for a lot of people, and I think there's a lot of burnout as well in product managers, and that's one of the reasons.
For sure.
So I think leaders, I already said this, but they should. I think this should be imperative in every technology company. Really have a well-defined onboarding. I think it's just should be true for any employee. I think it's especially true for product managers. I think there should be a skills assessment process for product managers because different people have different skill sets. Maybe some are more technical, some more business oriented, some more outward, some are more inward, etc. I do that with my clients. Have career growth plans as well, right? Like it's not just junior, senior, principal, etc. But what does that really mean when you get promoted? What does a principal product manager do, or how are they different than a senior product manager, etc.? I think you need to create a learning culture, right? So really think about how can you learn as a team and how can you teach each other, because you're all coming with varied skills. And I think that's really important. And I think it helps to get mentors or coaches. I do mentoring myself, but I've met a lot of other people who mentor, and there's a whole kind of generation of younger product managers who are struggling and they can't learn everything on their own. And I think finding those and helping them and augmenting their work is really important. So I think leaders should really think about these things. And then product managers, if you're not in a company that has all those things I just mentioned, educate yourself and get a good solid foundation. If you're entering product management, really look for a great first company to work in and find a great manager. I'll say this, and I didn't realize at the time, but I was lucky in my first job. It was a well-run company, and I had the VP of marketing was amazing. Like he understood product and he understood marketing, and he'd been in Silicon Valley, and he understood it, and he was a great mentor. And I take a lot of my lessons today from him, from then. I think make continuous learning your mantra. So as an individual, just continue to learn, but do it in a systematic way, right? It's not just listening to listening to podcasts and reading blog posts, but assess yourself and think about how you can improve and where you need to improve. And then I think again, if your company isn't going to do it for you, find a coach or mentor. There's a lot of free mentoring programs. I'll put a plug in for My Mentor Path. I'm not involved in it at all, but it's a kind of an organization in the UK and they're setting up sort of free mentoring for product managers. But there's a lot of organizations that do free mentoring, and I think that's a start. And if you want to pay for it, then that's good too. But I think coaches and mentors are really helpful.
Do you have any tips around like that first great company, or like that first great manager? Like any I would say ideas or tips on how to spot these?
So I think two things. I think it's, even though my experience was I went to a small company, at the time it was about 70 people, it was a really well-run company. And I can't underscore that. I didn't know how well-run it was until I got there. The two founders were really kind of systems thinkers, and they had a lot of discipline. But I think for a lot of young product managers, going to a startup sounds exciting, but a startup can be chaotic, and you may not get the support you want or need in a startup. So I would say in the first job, go to a bigger company that has things figured out, and then learn there. You'll get a lot more support there. And you also build a really great network, because people in big companies move to other companies. And I think that would be a great first experience. Like, go into a place where you can do a lot of learning, and then go to the startup or wherever you want to go, or grow up in that company. Maybe that company has a great career path set up. So that's my kind of advice, especially today, because that larger company didn't get large by just being ad hoc all the time, right? They systematized things, and they sort of thought things through.
Perfect. Thank you.
So this one here, poor product processes. And I like processes, and I think a lot of people don't, but I think people don't like bad process, right? And I'll say that, like, because there are good and bad processes. If you know anything about process, you might have heard of Edward Deming. He was a process guru in the 20th century, did a lot of work in Japan after World War II, and then came back to America. But here's two quotes, and I think they both are applied. So first of all, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. And I think that's absolutely true. Like, think of anything, right? Think of following a recipe. It's a process. And if you can't explain the process, then you don't know how to follow that recipe. Like, if you want to bake a cake, right? There's steps and things you have to follow. And it's true in cooking, and it is in business. And then the other thing is, when you're actually doing the work, it's not enough to do your best. You must know what to do and then do your best. So again, there should be a process you're following. I'm going to do X, and I'm going to do it well. I'm going to do Y. I'm going to do it well. And I think the reality is that as much as people don't like the word process, there's a value to it, and people need to understand that. And so, one thing is, process focuses people on actions that will lead to repeatable and ideally predictable outcomes. You can't always predict the outcome in business, but you want to try and get to a point where it's at least repeatable and hopefully, predictable most of the time, right? You want to have that cycle going. It's not just random work and let's hope it works out well. And then product management is full of process. Whether you like process or not, discovery is a process. Road mapping is a process. Strategy is a process, right? Prioritization absolutely should be a process. When you launch, etc. There's a lot of process, right? And it's not just product management. It's sales has process, engineering has process, marketing has process. Like, everybody has it. Yet for some reason, there seems to be a lack of rigor in a lot of product management organizations, and it's strange, because if there's any organization that really should be rigorous, it should be product. So I use this little diagram to kind of explain this concept, right? Like, people talk about outcomes over outputs, right? And that's all fine, and motherhood and apple pie, but you can't have outputs without actions, and you can't have actions without skills and knowledge, right? So you have to understand the whole flow. You can't just say, oh, we're going to go for outcomes if you don't know how to do something. And this middle part, the actions, right? You want them to be repeatable, efficient, scalable, and what I call teachable, right? So you can see the acronym REST. But if they're not repeatable, then you're just kind of ad hocing it all the time. If they're not efficient, then it's wasteful. If they're not scalable, then what are you going to do when you grow, right? It's okay with 2 people. What about when you grow to 10 people? And then if they're not teachable, then how do you get other people to adopt them, right? They can't be complex. And so this idea of process comes in right away. Like you want repeatable outcomes, you need repeatable process.
All right.
So,
okay.
I don't know, Peter, do you have a question?
No, that makes sense. Yep.
Okay. So for product leaders, you really have to think about efficiency and scale for your team, right? The best thing you can do is help your team be efficient and help them scale well, right? Most product management organizations are small. I remember my first job, there were 3 product managers, and our biggest kind of, excuse was we don't scale. Like we had the whole company coming to us for things, marketing and engineering and sales, et cetera, and we didn't scale. And so how do you help people scale? Well, help them be efficient as well, right? Think about the processes that they need to focus on. And if you can, if your team is big enough, find the systems thinkers on your team, right? Who can think end to end and understand this and work with them to create these teachable processes, right? Don't impose them from above. Work with your team and build them out, right? But you want to find the right people to build them out. And figure out some metrics to track. They don't have to be complex or anything, but try and get some measurement in there. So if you're doing discovery, get some measurement in there about the kinds of outputs you get, the kinds of insights you get based on the kinds of interviews and activities you do, right? You don't want to be doing 30 interviews when you could have done it in 10. And then mentor new PMs, like really bring them in, and part of the onboarding and beyond is to help them understand this so they get involved and brought in. And you don't have to do this yourself as a product leader, you can get the team to do it, but really institutionalize it, right? So that you're doing things as efficiently as, say, the engineering or sales organization, because like those people know what they're doing. Like a good sales organization is systematizing their work. So that's product leaders. And then product managers, if you don't have a product leader doing this, it's tough to bring process in, from the bottom. It really is. Like, you have to change the culture, and people aren't going to just change because you say so. So, I say be selfish, right? Like make your life better, make your life more efficient, and start, right? And show other people, hey, here's a really efficient way of doing whatever it is, road mapping or discovery or whatever. And think that rest, right? Especially the teachable part. How can I do this so that other people can learn it and adopt it if they see it's beneficial, right? And then if your manager sees you're doing well, work with them to hone it, so that others can use it. And then you can be the one maybe teaching and mentoring new PMs, but you want to get other people to adopt it. If you're the only one doing it, that's fine. It works for you, but it's not really benefiting the rest of the org.
What do you mean by be selfish, in fact, for the second point?
Well, okay, so what I mean is do it for yourself, right? Like just start, say like, okay, if no one else is going to do it and the org isn't going to do it, I'll do it, right?
Got it.
Like,
got it.
I'll make my life easier.
Got it. Makes sense.
So the next one is unclear objectives. And this one, like, everyone talks about OKRs, but if your objectives aren't well defined, the rest of it doesn't really matter. And I see a lot of people struggling with objectives. And so, objectives could be asked in different ways, right? What are we working towards? What are we trying to achieve? How will we measure success? Objectives can come in different forms, but I think that all objectives should be specific, measurable, and time-bound, right? So if you've heard of the SMART objectives, these are the S, the M, and the T. The A is achievable, and I forget what the R is. I don't really pay attention to them. I think three characteristics of an objective are more than enough. But specific, measurable, and time-bound makes sense, right? Because like I'm going to climb a mountain. Okay, that's not an objective. That's an aspiration. I'm going to climb a mountain this year. Okay, that's better. I'm going to climb Mount Everest this year. Okay, that's an objective, right? Like so, right. Specific, measurable, and time-bound. So I think once you have that as the basis, you can kind of move forward. But then you get in this problem of business objectives versus product objectives. And I'll say that, like in my career, I was mostly given business objectives. Your product has a revenue target, or we want to see a certain amount of customer adoption or something like that. And I can't achieve that on my own. I'm not selling, right? I'm not the one driving people to adopt a product. So I think companies need to understand that and have a blend of business and product objectives. Product objectives can support business objectives, but they need to be clear, right? So here's a few examples of business objectives, right? Increasing revenue, enhancing customer satisfaction. Those are out of scope of direct product management influence, right? They can support it, but they can't really achieve it on their own. And then you have product objectives like, in this case, ensuring security of sensitive information, or integration with other tools. And those might support, say, enhancing customer satisfaction, or they might support increasing revenue because more integrations might mean more sales, et cetera. But you want to kind of really think these through and find a nice balance to them, because, again, like I had a $6 million revenue target on a product. We achieved it, but, I spent a lot of time working with sales, but it was sales doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So objectives are important, and well-defined objectives are important. Now, why do I care so much about objectives? I'm not going to go through this whole diagram, but this is a kind of a framework I use to connect the dots between the top vision of a business or a product and the bottom, what we're building. And you can see very clearly that objectives are there at both the business level and the product level. And without objectives, what are you working towards? What are you going to achieve if you don't have clear objectives, right? And so how do we address them? I think it's the same for product leaders and product managers. It's hard to split it up. First of all, they should work together to define what I call clear, aligned, specific, measurable, and time-bound objectives. So I've got 5 things here, but I add clear and aligned simply because unclear objectives, not really useful. And if your objectives aren't aligned, i.e. they're divergent, then you're going to struggle in trying to meet them because you're not working towards the same thing. I've got an objective to do X and I've got an objective to do Y, and I don't know how to reconcile them. So they should be aligned, and then specific, measurable, and time-bound. I think this other one about product objectives and business objectives need to be understood in their relationship. And again, alignment between them. You don't want product objectives to be divergent from business because the product supports the business, obviously. And then lastly, measure outcomes versus objectives, right? So objectives are what we want to achieve. Outcome is what we did achieve, right? So measure those for product. We measure them in sales. We measure them in marketing, measure them for product as well. And then do essentially a retrospective or a postmortem and what worked, what didn't work, and create a good learning loop so that the product teams can understand where they can improve or how they can perform better.
All right. Thank you. And then one thing that stood out was obviously you said that culture is tough to change, like on the previous topic, but like here you believe that you can actually influence as a product manager and kind of drive that more clearly, right? Like with your manager and then maybe with a skip level manager, right?
Yeah, I think so. There's always business objectives, right? They're coming down from above. So if you're a product manager and you're talking to your manager, your product leader about those objectives, and talk about, okay, how can we define product objectives to support these business objectives, right? What should we do to help focus, those business objectives on product more, right? Because sales is going to drive revenue, right? But is there something you can do to support that? Or maybe there's, for example, hey, we want to expand into another country. Oh, we need to localize our software. We also need to update based on the local, privacy laws. We need to do, so there's a bunch of things that will fall out of any big initiative that's a business initiative.
Got it.
So let's define those explicitly and then make those objectives that we can connect our work up to whatever the company's trying to achieve.
Got it. So there's like that hook, like you said, like the business objectives exist anyways, and it's just like it's easier to attach to it. Okay.
Yeah, because we can't directly influence a lot of business objectives. Like it's very hard, right? As a product organization.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last one, weak product leadership. So this is, I've left it the last, although I think it's probably the biggest problem. And the reality is there's a huge shortage of experienced product leaders and especially in startups and scale-ups. It's just the reality. Product management is new. It's grown immensely in the last 10, 15, 20 years. There's way more technology companies today than there were 10 or 15 years ago. So the people who were around, ancient history 10, 20 years ago in product, those numbers don't match the numbers of companies that are looking for leaders. And so this is where the problem comes from, in my opinion, which is that there's just not enough good experience to share, and companies are making do, right? And they're making do by having other people, right, who maybe haven't come up in product, but own the product organization. So it could be they're part of marketing, could be they're part of engineering, or it could be that they bring someone in, hey, smart guy, spent time at Bain Consulting, knows product, or says he knows product, and we're going to get them to run product. And it's kind of weird because you would never hire, for example, a head of sales who had never done sales. I mean, if you did, you'd find out how problematic it was pretty quickly. And you don't do the same thing in finance, and you don't do the same thing in marketing, and yet it's commonplace in product. And I think the other side of the problem is people don't understand product management, and they think it's a lot simpler than it is. And so, yes, a smart person can figure it out. So I think that's a challenge. I think there's a bunch of anti-patterns, right? So I've mentioned some of them. Product leaders who haven't worked in product. Product is often subjugated under, say, engineering or another group. If a company is sales-led, then product is responding to sales demands. So they're not actually doing really forward-looking product management. They're mostly addressing sales needs. And not that a company can't grow by being sales-led. I've seen a couple of companies be very successful being sales-led, but it's a very hard role to be in product in that company because you're really being very reactive. You're not being proactive in terms of where you want to take the product. And then the other one I see that's an anti-pattern that product leaders often allow is that you have product managers and product owners, which itself is a bit problematic, but then they end up in different organizations, right? Product management might be in a product org, and the product owners are in engineering, and they have divergent objectives. And then they have to collaborate, and they don't collaborate well because they have divergent objectives, or the cultures are different, or whatever. So you see these kinds of things come out because of weak product leadership, not understanding how to structure an organization and how to run that organization. And so, I look at this, and of these 5 dysfunctions, I think weak product leadership is at the core of it. If you have strong product leadership who understand product, who know how to do a lot of the work, you will minimize, you won't get rid of all of this, but you'll minimize, the process issues, the objective issues, et cetera, and raise the bar in what the org can do. Because now you have someone who understands and can advocate for the product organization and for the business, quite frankly, in the same way that, say, an experienced sales leader or an experienced marketing leader could. So, and if you don't have that, then they're not going to be as strong an advocate.
Got it.
And so it's a tough problem to address because it's a real problem. It's not just a dysfunction because people don't understand. It's a real problem because there aren't enough people. So companies should understand product management, and then they should look for strong product leaders in the same way they look for other leaders. Even though it might be harder to find, they really shouldn't just give up. They should say, look, let's seek the people out. And today, with the wonderful world of remote work, you have a much larger kind of playing field that you can search on. And then the other thing is, if you have someone who's maybe isn't as experienced as you'd like, find a coach, right? Help them grow and execute effectively. Like really understand the problem, and then say, okay, how can we solve the problem? And one way to solve it is get some outside help. So that's
excellent.
It.
Let's open it up to some questions. And I see one question from Ricardo was product-led growth. He had a question like, what is it? Can you maybe talk about it a little bit?
Sure. So product-led growth, I've been around for a while. So I just say it's kind of the newest version of something that's been around for a long time, right? So not to discount product-led growth, but it's essentially try and buy, right? Like what you want to do is you want to, instead of selling explicitly kind of traditional sales, you create a product and you create an adoption path where people can come use the product, kind of see the value directly, and then license the product and grow the product from there. So you're really turning like a content strategy into a product strategy so that people can get their hands on the product as soon as possible in a structured way and then use the product. So, people have been doing evals and things like that for a long time, but this is really, you're giving them access to the product to actually use. And then, so like Jira, right, for an example, is a great example of product-led growth, right? It was very easy to access Jira. People would start using it, and then they would license it for the team or whatever. So it's a go-to-market strategy essentially, and it's an operational model to drive growth.
Perfect, got it. Excellent. Let me see what other questions we have, and before we get to those, let me remind everyone again of the upcoming SBM Summit in Europe that is on May 3rd and 4th in Frankfurt, Germany. So obviously it's like a hybrid event. You can join us online or in person, and you can find more details at sbmsummit.org/Europe. As mentioned earlier in the webinar, we have a lineup of fantastic speakers that you can all meet in person. We have ways to brainstorm, collaborate, and chit chat. Very much looking forward to the event next month. Anyone who is interested should definitely join us, whether it's online or in person. And I see Ricardo. Let me see what any other questions we have, but I think we're looking good. I want to thank you, Saeed, for joining us today and for presenting the 5 dysfunctions in product teams. That was very, very inspirational and informational. I really want to thank you for that, and we'll make this recording available to everyone else who was not able to join. With that said, thank you so much, and talk to you or see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.